I've talked about how we shouldn't see color because we're all human beings, and we talk about colorblind racism and some of the difficulties of it, of course, in my classes. And they express a tremendous feeling of guilt and confusion. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge it, that we help them understand what the issues really are, and that we work with them. Oh, and then the last one here. Nope, that's not the one, sorry. But what then becomes really interesting to me is how many students then are writing in their journals about, I'm getting ready to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to have these conversations, I'm going to share these ideas, I need to do this in my schools. And that then allows a whole lot of conversation on a one-on-one basis, as well as with the whole cohort, about how are you going to do this? How do you move this forward? What do you expect the responses to be? And so again, as students are expressing what they want to do, sometimes they take an article that is really quite difficult, and it's spoken to them, and they say, I'm going to share this article with my whole staff. And I find myself saying, I'm not sure that one is going to be the one to share with the whole staff. Maybe you could take this article, or maybe you could summarize these ideas, or whatever. But you can see that, and I've got many more of these quotations in a paper that I've written about this, that a lot of them are saying, this is going to make me change my practice. Fine, good intentions are not enough. That was the name of one of my books. But then they write about taking action. And they actually say, I've done this. This is what I've done. I'm beginning to have conversations with my staff about this curriculum. I'm bringing up issues about whether our curriculum addresses the needs of all the children who attend our school. Are we promoting equity? Now, wouldn't you think principals would have been doing that all along? Wouldn't you hope head teachers would have been doing that all along? And yet somehow they're being encouraged, supported, and able to do that as we have this sort of collective dialogue on an ongoing weekly basis. One of them, and this is a very common kind of response, I took the time to go and ask questions to my teachers. I wanted to find out what they were teaching in regards to Black History Month. I don't know if you have any month like that in Britain, but in America, February, I think it is Black History Month. And so you find all sorts of posters of Martin Luther King and all sorts of other Black scientists, etc., posted in the schools in that month, and not the rest of the year, right? Even in Black History Month, she said it was quite interesting and disappointing that they weren't taking advantage of teachable moments. They weren't even discussing the issue of slavery. Well, that's such, in some ways, a superficial starting point, but it really speaks to what is and what's not happening in the curriculum, and how they at least are beginning to talk to their teachers differently on the basis of having had a chance to explore and really discuss these issues in class. As they do this, this becomes really important. They find out how difficult it is, and how lonely it can be, and how still we're on the fringe. Those of us who focus a lot in traditional ed administration programs, educational leadership programs, that are basically geared towards the management that Professor Pring talked about this morning instead of leadership. People who do deep democracy and social justice work are often referred to as being on the fringe, right? I don't know if you feel that here, but that's certainly still the case in America. And so here are the things that they find. Every time I brought up this discussion, they looked at me like I had two heads. They have finally figured out I'm going to keep asking the questions. We don't have time for that. We have to teach the standards. You've heard those responses often enough. If I bring up a topic regarding social justice in our policies or procedures, I'm immediately thought of as being, and this speaks to a question that someone asked this morning, the liberal. I'm actually doing doctoral studies, so of course I'd ask that question, but it's not really the kind of question you expect school leaders to ask, right? And so it seems to me that this set of 5 issues raise a number of implications for us as we think about doctoral studies and teaching in our doctoral programs. The first thing, of course, is that the content has to be meaningful. And I know that I slant my content towards equity, democracy, social justice. There's absolutely no doubt about that. A critique of neoliberalism, a critique of standards. It's not balanced. And I tell them that because they get the rest from all the other professors in the program and they don't get the stuff they get from me. So as a program, it's balanced. But what I give them in my classes is focused on the values that I hold. At the same time, it's content that comes from many different countries. I give them articles from developing countries as much as I can, authors in other developed countries. I try and always add authors who are Latino, who are African American, who come from other cultures, who are male and female. So there's a balance of perspectives related to the kinds of things that I value. Okay? I think this notion that the methods that are dialogic, and the methods, of course, have to be just and ethical and democratic, if we're going to be teaching about that, is critically important. What does that mean? Partly it means that I have to respect students whose positions are different from mine. They're not all going to agree with me. Unfortunately, in my classes, I have a number of people who probably identify as closely with the Tea Party as I would with the opposite end of the scale. And I know you've heard about the Tea Party in the United States recently. I think this sense of the pedagogy being interactive and messy is particularly important. I had to learn to let go. You can't plan everything. You have to be willing to go with what the students are really focused on or concerned about or passionate about at the moment. But don't forget, they've already read the readings. They've already written and shown me they've done some thinking about them. So if I don't cover everything, I don't have to worry about it because it's the dialogue that becomes really important. But it's not just teaching. It's caring about the students. It's developing relationships with them. Because we're asking them to do something, if you buy my notion of teaching democracy and deep democracy, we're asking them to do something that's difficult, that can be lonely, that can be risky. And I think it's important to talk to them about, don't take the kinds of risks that are going to put your job in jeopardy. At least be aware of what you're doing if you take those kinds of risks, right? And so I think it's important to not just be a tutor, a professor, a lecturer, but I see my role also as becoming that of a critical friend. And I engage with my students in all kinds of different forums. And the one who said that she saw the class as a therapy group asked me if I would go and talk to her staff. I went out and they held their staff meetings at 7 o'clock in the morning. I spoke to them for a while. We did classroom observations. We wandered around the school. I met with every single one of her teaching teams and asked questions and pushed them a little bit and then left. And the week later she came back to class and she said, I just need to tell you, I've been using your name a lot this week. I've been saying, Dr. Shields asked this, or Dr. Shields saw this, or Dr. Shields wondered at things that I had never mentioned, probably hadn't even noticed. But they were the kinds of things that she needed some help saying, that she'd been raising without any success and needed somebody else's voice to join that conversation. It's nothing to me. It's not going to affect my job if she says, Dr. Shields wonders why you seem so disengaged in our staff meeting. But it helped her move the conversation forward. So I think that there are some implications to what I've been saying that are particularly important that pick up on the conversation from this morning as well. Quance, Rogers, and Dantley, same Dantley, they write about transformative leadership, as do I. And they said, those who know only the discourse of the status quo can hardly be expected to challenge the undemocratic aspects of the status quo. And that, I think, is really key to what I'm talking about. Our students come in, they've been captured by the dominant discourses of the day. They really only know the status quo and the discourse of the status quo, unless somebody has raised a different discourse with them. And I see that as being our job. If we don't give them a new language, if we don't help them to develop new understandings, how can we expect any resistance